Good morning, and thanks for waking up with us as we come live to you from downtown Dallas. Today is Sunday, November 8th. President-elect Joe Biden's victory over President Donald Trump sparked celebrations in cities across the country. As you can see here, we're waking up to what some say is a new day in America. President-elect Joe Biden's victory over President Donald Trump sparked celebrations in cities, as you saw, across the country. In Washington, D.C., the streets were filled at the Black Lives Matter Plaza within seconds of that race being called. From New York to Miami, Denver, and Austin, Biden supporters celebrated all day long, honking horns, cheering, dancing, and even popping some champagne in the streets. Good morning to you once again. Today is Sunday, November 8th. I'm Cleo Green. Thanks for joining us here. We've got a lot to cover. Joseph R. Biden Jr. is set to become the 46th president of the United States. Kamala Harris will be the first woman to become vice president. Biden and Harris celebrated their victory in Wilmington, Delaware last night with their families joining them on the stage. ABC's Elizabeth Schulze is in Washington with the latest.
The president-elect of the United States of America, Joe Biden.
President-elect Joe Biden pledging to heal a divided nation after a bitter and historic election.
I'll work as hard for those who didn't vote for me as those who did.
After more than 4 decades in public office, Biden reveling in the moment and sharing the spotlight with Kamala Harris, who makes history as the first woman, first black person, and first American of South Asian descent to be elected vice president.
But while I may be the first woman in this office, I will not be the last. Because every little girl watching tonight sees that this is a country of possibilities.
A record more than 74 million Americans voted for the Biden ticket, and after days of anticipation while ballots were tallied, many crowded the streets across the country to celebrate victory. President Trump's supporters also gathering, echoing the president's false claims that the election is being stolen. The president has yet to concede as his campaign vows more legal action contesting the results. Top Republican lawmakers silent after Biden's win. Still, the president-elect promising to reach across party lines and to get to work on an agenda that starts with fighting the pandemic.
Americans have called upon us to marshal the forces of decency, the forces of fairness, to marshal the forces of science and the forces of hope in the great battles of our time.
Sources tell ABC News President-elect Biden plans to sign a series of executive orders once he takes office that would reverse some of President Trump's policies, like rejoining the Paris Climate Accords and the World Health Organization. Elizabeth Schulze, ABC News, Washington.
And President-elect Joe Biden's victory speech was one of unity and hope. But what can we expect in his 100-day plan when it comes to policy? Joining us this morning is Cal Gilson, political science professor at SMU. Cal, are you there?
I am.
All right. Thanks for waking up early with us.
Sure. Glad to be with you.
Of course, Cal, you know, a lot of political experts saying this morning that this election, it really wasn't about policy differences. It was honestly about the mood of the country. How do you feel when it comes to that?
Yeah, I think that in the foreground certainly was a decision by Republicans to fight to try to keep Donald Trump in the White House and by Democrats to send him back to Mar-a-Lago. The Democrats won that fight, and now the transition begins, the healing begins if Biden is able to do that, and the policies most likely to be followed in the first 100 days, as was suggested in your piece. Every new president undoes what of the previous president he doesn't like and can undo, and then looks for a big win early on. I would expect that Mitch McConnell and President Biden will work on a infrastructure bill in their first month or so.
Okay, we're going to get into that a little bit more. But Cal, you know, no matter who you voted for, history was definitely made last night. And what did you think of both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's speech?
Well, those speeches were both quite good. Kamala Harris was given a lot of latitude for a newly elected vice president to set the tone for the Biden speech that followed immediately. And what Kamala Harris did is talk about the meaning of the first woman of color, South Asian descent, all of that stuff. And then Biden went into his theme of healing. and trying to bring the country back together again. That's going to be a task that will take some time, not going to happen immediately. All of those pictures of Democrats celebrating in the streets, great on every Republican that voted for Donald Trump and still believe that this race may not be over. So the celebrations, once they stop, then the healing can begin. And we'll see how long that takes and what form it takes, and in fact, whether or not it can be accomplished.
Right. You know, world leaders have congratulated Joe Biden, but President Donald Trump has yet to do so. In fact, reports saying he refuses to concede. What's the deal with that?
Well, Donald Trump's refusal to concede is of little import in the long run because the transition has begun. When those speeches were over last night, I flipped over to watch some of the Colorado UCLA football game, and even the announcers in that college football game were talking about President-elect Biden.
Yeah.
That decision has been made. Everybody but the people inside the White House accept it and understand it's happening. And there are even these sort of silly rumors at this point that Jared Kushner is advising President Trump to accept the results of the election. That's unnecessary. The results are accepted by everybody that counts, and that's most of the American people in the world that's watching closely. So our transition needs to be smooth and peaceful.
Right, a peaceful transition. Getting back to the 100-day plan, Biden saying last night during his victory speech that come Monday, he's going to announce his coronavirus task force. What's the deal with that, and what do you know so far?
Yeah, that is the president-elect wanting to show movement on what he says is his first priority upon coming into office. But of course, he has to be relatively careful with that because we still have a president, and that's Donald Trump. And he's going to be in office, and he's going to be making the decisions, formal decisions on the coronavirus front and other things until January 20th. So Joe Biden is trying to get started. He's going to appoint a commission that will advise him. It'll also make public statements, and it's got to be careful that those public statements aren't in conflict with what the president's coronavirus task force that Vice President Pence has been heading is doing, because we need a smooth transition. And one of those things is to find a way to get Trump's cooperation in turning the government over to Biden. And so anything that roils that transition is unfortunate.
And what do we know about the lawsuits or threatening lawsuits? How does that, I guess, stop the process?
Well, it doesn't stop the process at all. Most of those lawsuits have been given short shrift by the courts. They've been dismissed on the same day that they come in. They're mostly lawsuits about process, about whether Republican observers are allowed close enough to where the ballots are going to be counted to see what's going on. But there are no lawsuits that I'm aware of that bring credible evidence of wrongdoing of a scope that would change an electoral outcome in any of the states. The votes continue to be counted. No court has stopped the counting. And so we have a president-elect. And it's just a question of whether Donald Trump can bring himself to accept that. In the long run, even that makes little difference. We're in a transition.
Oh, Lord, we got to see what's going to happen in the next coming days here. Mr. Gilson, thank you so much for waking up early and sharing your insight and analysis this Sunday morning. Thank you.
Happy to do it. Thank you.
The Trump campaign has vowed to file additional lawsuits in the coming days despite Biden's apparent victory, alleging voter fraud and issues with the GOP's poll watchers being barred from observing the vote counting process. Now, with all the talk about lawsuits settling this presidential election, we've been getting some questions like who's going to foot the bill for these legal challenges? Here's our Verify team.
The Verify team is working around the clock to debunk election misinformation. 5 viewers emailed us wondering who's going to foot the bill for all these lawsuits. Take this one from Gwen Nykirk in Hagerstown, Maryland. Will taxpayers pay for the lawsuits being filed over the election results? So let's verify. Our sources here are the Federal Election Commission and Brendan Fisher, the director of the Federal Reform Program at the Campaign Legal Center. The FEC does allow campaigns and political party committees to use campaign funds to pay for election-related lawsuits. Fisher says that they could use leftover money from campaigning, or they could set up a legal fund, which both have.
The president and the Republican National Committee will use campaign funds and the political parties' funds to pay for these lawsuits. Taxpayers will not be paying for the president's post-election litigation.
Fisher tells us that if a candidate were to use taxpayer dollars, it would break ethics laws. But there is a caveat here. The states may be indirectly on the hook.
The states that the president is suing may incur some costs in defending themselves against that litigation.
And Fisher tells us that that would be money coming from state taxes, which is the case with any lawsuit against a state. So we can verify that false. Taxpayers will not have to directly cover lawsuits filed by President Trump. However, states, aka the taxpayer, might incur some costs in responding to these lawsuits. With your Verify, this is Evan Kozlov.